and welcome back to my Tekken Beginners Guide. Today we're going to be covering what you should, as a beginner, do once you load up the game to learn the ropes and make sure you're ready for the rest of the series. Starting now and for the remainder of the series, basically we're going to be spending all of our time in practice mode. So why don't we go ahead and make our way down to the offline game modes and head into practice. For this video, things like side selection and character selection aren't all too important. Go ahead and choose whatever side you want and whoever you want. The things I'll be discussing are relevant to the whole cast with a few exceptions, and those exceptions will be mentioned later as the video goes on. On the topic of stages, there are tons of different types and sizes of stages, but just for today, we're going to be going to an infinite stage. So go ahead and choose the one on the bottom left. This will allow us to move around freely without having to worry about the craziness that is the wall system. So we've moved into practice mode. Now we're ready to really start learning stuff. But before that, there are a few settings I believe we should check and change before we get started. It's likely that we'll be coming back in the menu in future videos to change some more things, but why don't we keep things simple for now. So once you open up the menu, you're going to head over to display settings, and you're going to make sure this top option, command history, is set to display. What this does for us is it displays every single action that we take on the screen, as you can see on the bottom. And this is important because when we're trying to execute different types of movement or attacks and they don't seem to be quite working as we want them to, we can tell what we're doing wrong. In addition to the command history, we'll now go over a few of the button notations that we'll be using throughout this video. Once again, pull up the menu and head down to the controller setup. My settings might already be different from yours, but let's not mess with these for now. Come down to the check button input. We're going to quickly address what buttons we'll need for today's video and where they are. Once you're in the check button input section, if you notice, when you press something on your controller, a button will light up according to what you're pressing. The top left button is known as 1. Top right is 2, bottom left is 3, and bottom right is 4. If we're in practice, we can notice that when you press these, in the command history, it will show up just like it does in the check button input section. This button notation is important to learn and familiarize yourself with, as this is the notation used across all Tekken players. Now that we've got the command history on, it's time to talk about movement. Learning Tekken can be a daunting task. It feels like there's so much homework to do that you'll be spending weeks of studying to just have the slightest chance against other players. So today, I'm making this guide as the first part of the beginner tutorial series to showcase how you can get prepared for online and hopefully the least amount of steps. I think first and foremost, movement should be addressed. If you're unfamiliar with movement in 3D fighters such as Tekken and Soul Calibur, you're going to be stumped in trying to do something as simple as navigating your character around the stage. Alright, so where do we go from here? Well, let's just experiment a bit. Small disclaimer, I'm using a DualSense PlayStation 5 controller, so any terms I use for movement will be in accordance to what this controller has to offer. There are 4 directions that you can move in Tekken. Backwards, which is done by holding away from the opponent on your D-pad. Forwards, which is done by holding towards the opponent. Moving into the background, which is done by either tapping up, which results in a small sidestep, or tapping, letting go for a split second, and holding, which results in a continuous walk in that direction. And lastly, you can move into the foreground by simply doing the same things you did in the background but replacing up for down, like so. In addition to those things, you can also duck by holding down or down back, and you can also jump straight up towards the opponent and away. And in addition to those things, you can also backdash by tapping back twice, or forward dash by tapping towards the opponent twice. When you're a certain distance away from the opponent, a forward dash will turn instead into a forward run. And you can do this from closer distances by triple tapping forward, like so. Depending on what character you've taken in practice today, you may have noticed that they have a special type of movement exclusive to their character that overrides the aforementioned movement commands that I stated earlier. With Heihachi here on the right, we can see that by tapping forward, he simply inches toward the opponent. Whereas with Kazuya, he would do a small dash, despite inputting the same command. Kazuya's special dash here has no applicable use in-game, but some characters unlock different moves from their own. If you followed high-level Tekken or played the series before, you may recognize the term Korean Backdash. This is a movement technique which allows you to rapidly create space between you and the opponent. Many players will tell you that this is a vital skill towards learning Tekken, and while I agree, I noticed that many players do not apply this technique to serve its purpose effectively. I'll elaborate more on that in a bit, but why don't we try it for ourselves first. So how do we properly execute a Korean Backdash? Well, we're going to break it up into 4 different parts today. Part 1, all it is a simple backdash, like so, back, back. After that, part 2, you're going to be holding down, back, like that, and you should be ending in this crouch position. Part 3 is after you're holding down, back, you let go for a split second, and then you press back. And right there, you can see I do a little dash back. Now after this, instead of back, back, down, back, back, it's simply going to be back, down, back, back, down, back, back, down, back, and repeat that over and over. Only the very first rep is back, back. So it'll look like this. You may have noticed that when I was explaining the steps for the Korean Backdash, that I said the second step was to press down and back together. But when I was doing it, it seemed more like I was doing something like this, quarter circle back. Why does this matter? Well, in the case of Bryan, Paul, and Nina, it does. For Kazuya, Heihachi, and the entire rest of the roster, it does not. This is because the 3 exception characters all have a special stance called backsway, which is accessed by inputting a quarter circle back. How does this relate to the Korean Backdash? For these 3, it just means your inputs have to be even more precise, otherwise your backdash will look like this, and you can't even block during the backsway, whereas you can in a backdash. In short, these 3 don't have the luxury of being able to have sloppier inputs and not work. This small drawback should not stop you from playing these 3 characters though. You still have tons of fun with them, and all this means is that your inputs will be even more precise than mine at some point. Now comes the next question. Why are we Korean backdashing in the first place, and how do we apply it to our gameplay? Well, we Korean backdash create space. What we do with that space will vary, but unless your opponent has the health lead and is moving away to run down the clock, only good things can come from creating space. I'll now showcase a few options where Korean Backdash can heavily reward you. Number 1, escaping pressure. Here the Heihachi is pressuring with a few of his moves. In the middle of this, I will Korean Backdash create some space and punish him for his continuous attack. The second application of Korean Backdash is anticipation of attacks coming in. Here, Heihachi will attack with a move that normally hit me from both this range and this range. But by chaining together Korean Backdashes, you can escape the effective range of moves and punish accordingly. Now that I've shown you guys how to properly Korean Backdash and when to apply it into your gameplay, let's see one example of how you should not be using it. And this is something that I actually see quite often. For my viewers who have played this game already, let me know if you've ever seen this type of situation. You're playing in neutral with the opponent, and they start to do this. And they keep going, and they keep going, and they keep going, and they're trying to backdash their way to Narnia. But this does nothing. This doesn't give you anything. If the opponent does a move, which I'll play right here, what am I going to do? I can't do anything about that. If I'm creating too much space, neither of us benefit. The only situation in which the opponent or you will benefit from this is if you have the health lead and you're trying to run away. That is the one time this will be effective. Like I said before, Korean Backdash creates space, but you need to utilize that created space. If you're too far, you will not be able to. So you need to stay out of your opponent's effective range while still being in yours to punish. Like so. So at this point, we've covered all of the standing generic movement options that you would have available to you on an infinite stage. So now, we're going to cover grounded options. But real quick before that, I'd like to give some of my beginner viewers, or some of the players who are struggling with Korean Backdash, a shortcut. Now this is something that I don't advise use long term. because learning how to Korean backdash is very beneficial to your gameplay. But this is a substitution that you can use right now if you just want to hop online and be able to still effectively create space and utilize that created space. Now all it is just back back and then up or down, back back. And when you do it quickly, you're still effectively doing what a Korean backdash offers, but it's just a little bit more sluggish, like so. And you also drift to the side. You can't really stop that, but this is easier, and this is something that more players are going to be able to do right off the bat. And with that, we will now go to grounded movement options. So let's go ahead and pull up the start menu. You're going to go to the Restart Settings tab right here. Go to Player Status and set this to down, face up. Every time you restart now by pressing the Select button and 3, you will be put on the ground. And this will allow us to freely explore the grounded movement options. So let's start with the first grounded movement option to get up off the ground. And that will be the back roll. To execute a back roll, all you have to do is hold back, like so, as you can see on the command list. Holding back, my player moves slightly backwards, and also, they aren't vulnerable when they're doing this. There are situations where you can get hit, and this is why I'm going to give you other options when you're on the ground. Second, we have the standing option. All you have to do for this is press up, like so. You pop right up. It's a little bit faster than the back roll, but you're more vulnerable and you aren't pushed away from the opponent, which is one of these benefits from the back roll. You create space. Next up, there's the forward roll. This is a very risky option, especially if the opponent is close to you, but if there's quite a bit of space, it's not a bad option to close more space if you want. Now we'll be covering the grounded movement options that leave you on the ground. To roll into the foreground, all you have to do is tap 1, like so. And you'll see Kazuya rolls on the ground and then stands up after a second. To roll into the background, you're going to hold down and 1, like so. Now you may have noticed right there, Kazuya stayed on the ground. And that's because I kept holding down. This works for both roll options. Upon doing a side roll and deciding to stay on the ground, you still have access to all of the other wake up options, except for more grounded side rolls, like so. Another type of movement available to the entire roster is the moves available to you when you're hitting the ground from the air. First up, we have the quick back roll. This option is relatively safe, puts a little bit of space between your opponent, and it's quick to get up. Overall, this is a pretty safe option. Second, we have the quick rise. This is a very risky wake up option. It has a little attack when the opponent is right next to you, but anything other than that, they'll be able to punish you very hard for going for this option. Only use this sparingly. Last, we have tech rolls. Tech rolls are a quick way to get up. They move you to the side, depending on what button you press, and they're a relatively safe option as well. Here is a tech roll into the background, and a tech roll into the foreground. Tech rolls into the foreground can be done by pressing 3 or 4, and tech rolls into the background can be done by pressing 1 or 2. Alright, and that about wraps up for this Tekken Beginners Guide on Movement. I'm well aware there are other types of movement in this game, but I wanted to cover only the things available to all characters, and only the things I believe beginners should be incorporating into their gameplay. I quickly brushed past sidestepping, which is a very important aspect of Tekken, and the reason for that is I will cover that in its entirety in its own whole video. Once again, I'm so happy to be making these videos, and if it only ends up helping one person, I'll still be more than satisfied. I'll continue to improve on my teaching and editing skills, and I can't wait to push out more content for you guys. Thank you.